Hey, everybody, Tom and Keith coming your way. We're the Front Row Noles guys, and happy to do this and share this with our Osceola colleagues and just kind of a walk down memory lane. Everybody's got Bobby stories. And before we talk about his impact and his legacy, which is huge, Keith, what anecdotal or what's your favorite humorous Bowden story or memorable Bowden story that you can share from over the years?
Well, I've shared this on the radio show, and obviously you've heard me say it a couple of three times, but the actual last time I was with Coach Bowden, which was in late May out at the house, spent the afternoon out at the house taping some stuff. We finished all that up, and he was sitting in his chair, and he walks with a cane now. So he had his cane propped up beside his chair, and he was talking, and he moved his elbow, and he knocked his cane down on the floor. So he started, as we all would, to reach down and pick it up. And he wasn't going to get there. So I jumped up and said, "Coach, I'll get your cane." And as I looked up and made eye contact with him, man, it was that look about, he was fixing to make me run some gassers or run some stadiums. I mean, I had done something wrong. And I picked the cane up and I set it down with fear and trepidation. And he looked at me and he winked with his left eye. He says, "It's not a cane. It's a walking stick. Canes are for old people." and he just got a big smile on his face, and that's Bobby. That's just who Coach Bowden is, when he's not in the limelight and not at the podium, although he's very funny there as well, but just a genuinely funny guy, a well-rounded guy. That's my anecdote. The other one I enjoy telling is self-serving, but when I was fortunate enough to win my Emmy 100 million years ago, I actually had a one-on-one interview scheduled with him down in the locker room. And I go walking in, and the video people were set up, and we had the chairs and everything. And I was sitting there and doing a mic check, and he comes walking in, and I stood up. And as Bobby always did, he always shook hands with everybody that was present. It could be the camera person, it could be the audio person, it could be the interviewer. It didn't matter. He shook hands and said hello to everyone. So he did all that. He shook my hand, and they're getting ready and putting the mic on him. And he looked at me with another different look on his face and went, "You won an Emmy? A boy from Wildwood won an Emmy?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he just shook his head. It was like that was the most unbelievable thing he could ever hear. So that's a little bit self-serving. The cane one I've enjoyed telling because that's traditional and typical Bobby.
Yeah, well, people watching this video know all about Bobby. You could go down a YouTube hole and find all of his quips and comments. His delivery at the mic when he was on was unbelievable. I mean, he was just
those Monday afternoon luncheons, those Monday luncheons after the game. He'd talk and talk and talk, and then he'd go, "Well, I guess we better look at that film." It was never taped. It was never digital. Guess we better look at that film. And then he'd start narrating whatever was going on with the game recap.
Yep, exactly right. So I remember media days. This has to do with coming at it from a media point of view, but the access that he allowed both to himself and to his program. I mean, the locker room was open much later in years. I mean, other locker rooms had long been closed to the media. And FSU's locker room was still open access, so you could talk to anybody. But on media day, he, instead of just doing one big press conference, he would work the room and he'd talk to everybody, give everybody 5 or 10 minutes, for all the local TV stations. But I used to just literally, I did this for years when I was at Channel 27. I just say, "Coach, put as many cliches about the upcoming season as you possibly can into one soundbite." And then we'd go back to Channel 27 and I'd put a cliche meter up and it would ding every time he said a cliche, right? But he would look at the camera and he would say, "Tom, if we catch a few breaks, if we have some leaders emerge, if we don't have guys get injured, good Lord willing, things will work out fine." Like he would just do that in 15 or 20 seconds and he'd shove 11 cliches in there and it was perfect. And it was more entertaining than actually getting a soundbite from any other coach that was a cliche, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, he was the best. And he was also because he and Joe Paul were the deans of college football, anytime something significant happened in college football, you'd just go to his house and he'd react to it. So Tom Osborne retires, go to Bobby's house. He'd have you in and he'd do an interview. Jake Gaither passed away, I go to Bobby's house. all those sorts of things, because ESPN and everybody nationally wanted to see Coach Bowden's reaction to what just happened. And so one time, Keith, I guess the first time I went there, I knock on the door and he's on his phone, as he typically is, already doing an interview with somebody, and he waves me in. And before I get in the door, a cat comes running out. And now I don't know a thing about cats because I was a dog person, but I'm thinking that I just let the coach's cat out and I got to chase this thing down and bring it back into the house. So I spent about 5 minutes trying to do that, and the cat wasn't going to pay attention to me. Went in and did the interview, and I trust that the cat was allowed to go out and found his way back, because I never heard anything about it. But that was kind of my first experience at his house. But I mean, there's just one story like that after another about him. Just from a media standpoint, you couldn't ask for better.
When there was a time, gosh, when we had first started doing Front Row Noles, we set up some time, if you'll remember, when we went to his house, and we just put a tape recorder in the middle of the dining room table, and you sat on one side and I sat on the other, and he sat in the middle, and we just talked for about 40 minutes. I guess we got 2 or maybe 3 different segments out of that time. But if you'll remember, when we got there, he had on a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. And he said, "No, this radio or video?" I said, "No, Coach, this is radio." He said, "All right, well, I'll be back in just a minute." And he went upstairs and he put on a golf shirt and a blazer, a coat, and came back down with his athletic shorts, no shoes, no socks. But he was going to do an interview, so he was going to have that coat on, even though it was radio.
and it wasn't like you and I were dressed in coats either.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. Well, David Teal just last week on our show shared a story, which I can relate to, because in the TV days I dealt with deadlines, but I was never a print guy. But David remembers this as ACC media, and David's a long time, sort of a dean of ACC sports writers, if you will. FSU would be winning so big in the 90s against the ACC opponents that in the fourth quarter of games, because newspapers were about to hit deadline and have to go to print, Bobby would supply quotes to the media, which sounds really cocky. Like, here's this guy, he's giving quotes while the game's still going on. But nobody knew that was the arrangement. He was just kind enough to offer quotes and comments to the newspapers so that there was a quote from the coach the next day in the paper. And then on top of that, then he'd have breakfast with the media on Sunday mornings at 8.
Which nobody ever did. Nobody had even heard of. That was unheard of at the time.
How about what he did for Gene?
I was just fixing to go there.
I shared this. Yeah, I'll let you tell the story then.
Well, I've exchanged a couple of texts with Gene this morning. 2 things always stand out with me about the relationship between Gene Deckerhoff and Bobby Bowden. Number one, Coach Bowden is the only person that I've ever heard call Gene Jeannie. All of us call him Gino, but Coach Bowden called him Jeannie. And that was really unique and really special to Deckerhoff. He talks about that all the time. And then secondly, when he started doing basketball at Florida State, that was in 76, 77, plus or minus. He didn't do football until my junior year in 1979. Well, in the mid 80s, he had done some Tampa Bay Bandit work when Burt was involved with that Tampa Bay USFL franchise. But the Bucks approached him in the mid 80s, late 80s, about doing the Tampa Bay radio games. And Gene was hosting Coach Bowden's radio show, which was typically shot, plus or minus 11 o'clock, noon on Sunday, and then distributed out from there. And Gene went to Coach Bowden and said, "I've got an opportunity to do the Bucks, but it's going to create some logistic problems." Well, Gene didn't tell him. Again, this is Gene relaying the story to me. You add what you know. But Gene didn't tell him what all that meant. It just meant they would have to do something different. And without even hesitating, Coach Bowden said, "Gene, do you really want to do this?" And he said, "Well, yeah, Coach, I do." He said, "Well, Jeannie, we'll do whatever needs to be done." And what needed to be done is that oftentimes Coach Bowden would fly back and Gene would fly back with the team, land in Tallahassee at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and go immediately into the studio and tape the Bobby Bowden show. And then Gene would go to the house, get a couple of nights sleep, get in the mini Madden, which is what we called his RV.
Yeah.
Get in the mini Madden and drive to Tampa or drive to the airport and fly to get to wherever the Bucks were. No head coach would do anything like that for their broadcaster, but Bowden did it for Deckerhoff and never complained about it a bit.
No head coach then, now, ever would have done that for Gene. Yeah, it's just story upon story of that sort of access that he provided. And then, beyond that, he was always humble, gracious. We've talked about this on the show. He was better after losses than wins in terms of just revealing. Nowadays, if you ask a coach about why you ran the ball on 3rd and 6 instead of throwing it, the coach is going to avoid that question and talk about, we need to look at the tape and how dare you question my authority. That's kind of the tone you're going to get from most of today's coaches. And Bobby would do the opposite. He'd say, that's a good question. We thought about running the football there, or we thought about throwing the football, but we really felt like, we could get whatever it was. But a lot of coaches won't engage in that kind of conversation. He would have that conversation with you. And of course, the famous quote, and unfortunately now a tombstone's going to be in play, Keith, but when he was climbing the mountain and couldn't beat Miami, he said, well, someday my tombstone's going to say, at least he played Miami, and we could update it to say, well, at least he beat Miami and won some titles, because he did get to the mountaintop after that.
Everybody in recent times knows Coach Bowden as the grandfatherly type and that type of thing. They forget about the younger Bowden, and even the older Bowden still had these streaks in him, but unbelievably competitive, very driven, very determined. When I was doing games, you and I were doing games on television. Remember, we lost Paul Kennedy for a couple of years. He went and did work with the Timberwolves. And I won't name the person by name. You'll have to look that up. But he decided that he wanted to branch out and do some other things. So we were getting ready for Bowden versus Bowden Bowl 1, which, by the way, is being aired on the ACC network, and I think maybe even on ESPN, although I'm not supposed to say that 4-letter word anymore, am I? So I arranged for an interview on Saturday about noontime or 1 o'clock with Miss Ann to talk about her being, going to root for her son, going to root for her husband, whatever. We went in and did an interview. While we're doing the interview, Coach Bowden walks in. He'd come back from Thomasville, been up there with the team. He'd come back in. He was going to get a little nap before he went to Doak Campbell Stadium. We get through with the interview. My colleague says to Ann, you reckon Coach Bowden would do something? And Ann goes, sure, she'll do so. He'll do. She goes up, and you can hear them arguing. You can hear them, and directly Coach Bowden comes down with a shirt and a coat, and he does this interview. And he's as gracious and nice on camera as you've ever seen. We get through. My colleague and the cameraman go outside to do something. Coach Bowden says, Keith, come here. And I get that look again.
Right.
I walk around into the kitchen. He goes, Keith, I don't do interviews on game day. Because, see, this was the Saturday that Florida State was playing somebody that night. Bowden Bowl was next week. They were getting this interview on Saturday in preparation for the Clemson Florida State game. I don't do interviews on Saturday. I said, Coach, it wasn't my idea. He goes, well, whose idea was it? I said, Coach, to be honest with you, it was Miss Ann's idea. Now, Ann knows better than it. Okay, no problem. I understand.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to mess with Miss Ann.
He wasn't. We'll wrap up here. We'll tell more stories on Front Row Noles, which, by the way, folks, this week moves to a new time and a new station. So we'll be airing 12 noon to 1 o'clock on Real Talk 93.3 from this point forward. And we'll continue to do the podcast as well. But, everybody has a Bobby story, and maybe that's, when everybody's got a positive story to share, that maybe speaks volumes to how great a man he was, Keith. But I'll let you finish it up as somebody who played for him, and what your biggest takeaway will be from your association with Coach Bowden.
The influence he had in making young boys into young men. And when we get together now, because it doesn't matter who started, who had records, who did anything, we were all teammates. And everyone is just so appreciative of the example that he set. When we needed him, he was available. I was not in his office very much, just a couple of 3 times during my 4 years. But there were others that went in there quite frequently, and he would detach as the coach and become the advisor, the mentor, in some cases, the father or grandfather. And you mentioned everyone wanting to tell the story about Coach Bowden. I think the similar value of how you value a life is how many people wanted to go by and see Coach Bowden in his latter days, to the point that the family had to just say no more, because everybody wanted one last chance to visit with the man that they admired, the man they looked up to, the man they held in esteem, and the man that they loved. And I think that's a great, great tribute to Coach Bobby Bowden.
Well said, Keith. RIP to one of the all-time greats in Bobby Bowden.